ties. You never knew. You had no idea what was going to happen with these WHA games, but you knew it was going to be exciting hockey. And then the Jets went to Europe for training camp to set up the 75-76 season, which became a championship year for them, beating Houston 9-1 in the final game, and I was at that game as well. And the hotline was just getting started then, Peter.
Well, not only that, I mean, that trip to Europe, I talked to Kenny Nicholson about this many times before he passed away, because he was the only other media person on that trip. And, he and I were lifelong friends, grew up, went to high schools, well, not together. He went to one high school, I went to another, and he was like 3 or 4 years older than me, but he was my best friend because he had a car, and that was cool when you had a car. And anyway, Kenny and I talked about this, how that trip seemed to galvanize that team. And, they played away from the hometown crowd, of course. They hadn't had the greatest season before that. It was a chance for the Swedes and Finns to share the dressing room with the North Americans. And you would think that the North American players would be a little standoffish in that these Europeans were replacing jobs that had been held by North Americans. And so a number of their teammates were no longer there. So I think that trip galvanized them. And the funny part is, you would have thought that in Sweden that Ulf, Anders, and Schu, all members of the Swedish national team, in fact, Schu, the captain of the Swedish national team, before they left, you would have thought that they would have been treated as gods, heroes, conquering heroes when we went to Stockholm and Gothenburg. And I'll tell you one short story about who was revered. We played against Stockholm, SAK, and on a Sunday afternoon, and we weren't going to Gothenburg till Tuesday morning. And so we skated. When I say we, I mean the team skated the next morning, just a regular practice. And when we left that, it was a school day. And when we left that practice, knowing that it's a school day, there's not going to be a soul outside waiting for autographs. And we walk out the door, and the bus is surrounded by at least 150 kids with their autograph books. And that's what they did in those days. Kids, they didn't have cards to be signed. They all had these little autograph books. Anyway, I thought, well, the Swedes are going to be here forever. The Swedes never got stopped and asked for one autograph. The Swedes got on the bus with the rest of us. Bobby was surrounded, and Bobby started signing autographs. And I don't know how many stories you've heard about stuff like this, but if you knew Bobby, there was never a chance that every single kid wasn't getting an autograph. And Bobby never scribbled an autograph until I saw him 4 months ago. Every signature was perfect. Every signature is exactly the same. And until 83, it was just best wishes, Bobby Hull. It took forever. Then after 83, it was best wishes, Bobby Hull, HOF 1983.
Yeah.
But even took longer. So now we're on the bus, and 10 minutes goes by, and guys are getting impatient. They want to get back to the hotel. And, some guys are going, come on, Bobby, let's go. And after about 20 minutes, this voice from the back of the bus, in fact, I was sitting back there with him, Teddy Green, NHL veteran, previous Avco Cup winner with Hartford. Teddy Green stands up and says, let's go. And I thought, boy, that bus driver is going to be pooping his pants now, because Teddy Green just screamed at him. Teddy wasn't talking to the bus driver. Teddy marched from the back of the bus out the front door, and everybody followed him like the Pied Piper, and we all walked a mile back to the hotel. And an hour and a half later, that bus pulled up with just the bus driver and Bobby, because Bobby wouldn't leave till every single kid in Stockholm that was there that morning got the exact same signature in his autograph book. And that tells you the impact. When you mentioned putting Winnipeg on the map, that tells you the impact that Bobby Hull made in the European market.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, those kind of stories. I mean, you read one. I just read one the other. I thought I'd heard every one, and I read one the other day from a Philadelphia Blazers.
The Blazers story, yeah. That was amazing to read. Can you tell our audience about that?
I mean, yeah, the Jets played the Blazers, and
the Blazers, just to set the stage, they were entered the WHA as competition. Yeah. To the Flyers. It was bad timing because the Flyers were just on the ascendancy with Bobby Clarke at the time, and they had signed Derek Sanderson to the biggest contract imaginable, and also had signed Bernie Parent and Johnny McKenzie. So they had some pretty well-known, pretty high-end hockey players on their team, and we're trying to build a competition of the NHL in that market. And here's Bobby on the ice with the rest of his teammates in that first season.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, even though he's Bobby Hull in Philly, it's a tough crowd. You know, they'd boo your grandmother if she was playing for the opposition. You know, I mean, it's not an easy city to play in. And so anyway, end of the game comes, guys are going off the ice. Bobby's always the last one off the ice. And as he's leaving the ice, he notices this father with a little toddler youngster, maybe 4.5 years old. And Bobby stops to say hello to the little kid and realizes that the kid is blind. And his dad says that he's the biggest hockey fan. He listens to all the games on the radio, and this was the first game that he'd ever brought him to live so that he could hear this crowd sound and hear, you know, the ambient sound of the arena. So Bobby bent down and started chatting with the little guy. And then he picked him up, and you've seen pictures of people doing this when they teach kids how to skate or whatever. He picked the little kid up, he put him on his skates so the kid could get the feel of what it would be like to skating. And he skated around the rink with this little 4.5-year-old on his skates for about 5 or 10 minutes. Obviously, the kid is, you know, beyond over thrilled. And so now he brings him back to say, and instead of just passing him off to the dad, he sits down on the players' bench and chats with the dad and the little boy for another 20 minutes, half an hour, till the bus is already gone. So the Jets bus is already back to the hotel. So Bobby says, "Oh, I'll take a cab, don't worry about it." And the father says, "No, I'll drive you back." So Bobby goes and changes, and the little boy and the dad and Bobby all drive back to the team hotel. And then Bobby says, "Come on in, and I'll buy you dinner." And so Bobby brings the family in. They have dinner, and then as the story goes, and this is being told by this dad now, and the story goes that Bobby would phone the kid throughout the rest of that season every once in a while just to see how he was doing. So, you know, there's all the negative stories about Bobby, and I'm not going to try to defend those here, but the guy did some pretty amazing things. And the other story that I heard just recently that it blew my mind, and you would know the family, the Simpkin family, and they were involved with Benny when Benny had to write the check, although it wasn't just Benny that wrote the check that got Bobby to sign, but Scotty McVicker, who was the Jets trainer, I guess they called them trainers then, we'd call them athletic therapists now. Yeah. He was the Jets trainer in the 72-73 season. And he tells a story the other day that I thought I'd heard every story. I hadn't heard the Philadelphia story. He tells a story about Judy Crutch from a name that I hadn't even thought of in 40 years, who was one of the
secretary, I think.
Yeah, she was Benny's secretary up in if you remember the old arena, if you came in the main doors, right above those was the Jets offices. And so Bobby's down getting some work done in the trainer's room, and Judy comes running down to yell for Scotty because he's the closest medical guy that was there. And they rush upstairs, and Dave Simpkin is laying on the floor, and Bobby, of all people, does CPR on the guy until the medical professionals arrive. Well, who'd have thought that Bobby Hull, and then I find after he was like an expert at doing CPR. Well, who back in '72 did that?
Not an awful lot of people. I remember when Dave Simkin passed away. I'm not sure. I guess it was his brother Blackie. Was still a member. The Simkins were actually members of the Talmud Torah synagogue. Sam Simkin went to school with my brother. Yeah. And as I mentioned, somehow we were distantly related to one of the Simkins somehow. But I remember when Dave Simkin passed away, and I'm actually surprised that within our own community that we had not heard about the extraordinary efforts that have been made by Bobby and by Scotty to try to save him.
How many stories like that do we
won't know at all?
You know, when you die, your stories die with you, and so unless somebody was there to, and Bobby was never the type that would brag or boast about any of his charitable work or the things that he did,
which was extensive.
Yeah, crazy.